Hello, I am Matthew Swab, and I have something to say. All Warlords of Draenor dungeons use personal loot too, but every boss will always drop an item regardless of your class and regardless of your spec. This is important because in World of Warcraft's patch 7.3.5, all old dungeons got mandatorily changed to personal loot only. But unlike the Warlords of Draenor and Legion personal loot systems, these old dungeons have no guarantee that bosses will drop loot, and quite frankly, bosses should drop loot, at least in World of Warcraft. It's sort of the point of the game. The change to personal loot only in these old dungeons is bad for 3 reasons. The first reason is it screws with the reward of it. No loot, no vendor gold, no enchanting mats, no satisfaction. Pretty bad. The second reason is that it is inconsistent with existing personal loot systems such as the Warlords of Draenor and Legion dungeons. Pretty bad. And the third reason is that it is worse than it was before. Pretty awful. I'll go into some detail here on this third reason. Before this change, the old dungeons would have guaranteed loot. It wouldn't always be an item that you could use or even equip. For those, you could vendor them or disenchant them, which is very important for the enchanting profession. But going back to the point, there are more items that you can equip than are assigned to your class or spec under personal loot. To explain this, let's look at the warrior class. Warriors can use every type of weapon in the game except for wands. And as plate wearers, they can wear plate, mail, leather, and cloth. So before the forced personal loot change, if RNG determined that a caster staff would drop from a boss, the warrior would be able to equip that staff and collect the appearance. Now under the new system, if RNG determines that a caster staff will drop and there's only a warrior soloing the dungeon, the staff won't drop and there will be no loot. Additionally, if RNG decides that a cloth, leather, or mail armor piece would drop, the warrior will no longer get it. And while warriors cannot transmog those types of items nor collect their appearances, they can still wear them and use those items as cosmetics, at the cost of stats and bag space, which is what people did before the transmog system was implemented in World of Warcraft. So with these things to consider, it is significantly worse for warriors, and to a lesser extent other classes, under this new forced personal loot system in the old dungeons. And that is why it is awful, and that is why many people are quite unhappy about this. And to make them just a little madder, I'd like to remind them that this does not apply to Warlords of Draenor dungeons, at least in the same way. You still won't get that caster staff or cloth items on your warrior in the Warlords of Draenor dungeons, but every boss while soloing being guaranteed to drop an item that is equipable by you is a far better system, from the player's perspective, in general, than just a random drop that you may or may not be able to use, and way better than the chance of not getting any loot at all. So what should be done about this situation? Blizzard, of course, doesn't have to do anything, but I, as a player, would like them to, and I can say the same for many others. The simplest, consistent solution is either to A. revert the change, or B. make it consistent with how it is done in the Warlords of Draenor dungeons. They could also give back the option to switch between personal loot and normal loot. They could also give back that option, while at the same time fixing the personal loot to be consistent with the Warlords of Draenor dungeons. I'd be quite happy if they did that. And I'd be even happier if they went beyond just fixing the loot in these old dungeons. There are more places in World of Warcraft where bosses should drop loot, but don't, than just these dungeons under the change. The most glaring of these is when you solo queue for the old Dragon Soul LFR wings, which is so horrendously bad that people estimate that you could clear the dungeon every week for a year and still not get your complete set. Which is a shame, since some of the LFR recolors are better than the normal ones. Aside from Dragon Soul, the other LFR raids, and the raids that force personal loot, which is Siege of Orgrimmar to the present, could use improvements to make sure bosses drop loot, or at least enough loot, for the effort. And with that said, I've said pretty much everything that I wanted to, but I guess I could throw in one suggestion that would be relevant. Wouldn't it be cool if the Trial of Style reward tokens could be used to buy reroll coins for all old dungeons and raids to help with transmog farming? And with that, I'm out of things to say. I am Matthew Swab, and thank you for listening.